Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders, politicians. All are one-to-one. Our guest today meets several of these criteria. Randi Weingarten, president of the United Federation of Teachers, has to use her lawyerly skills as well as her education expertise to represent the union's growing constituency and reach. Welcome.
It's great to be here.
Randi, despite the UFT's title, the union represents more than just school teachers. Tell me who your members are and how many of them there are.
Well, right now there's over 200,000 of our members because we also represent folk after they retire. And you want to make sure that people who have given so much to kids or to whatever services they were providing as public servants are safe and secure in retirement. So there's about 50,000 retirees who are very active members of the union. But we represent virtually everybody who works for the school system in schools other than the principals and the assistant principals and the food service workers. We represent virtually everybody else. But we also now represent, this year, we won the largest organizing drive in the city of New York in 40 years. We represent family daycare providers. Now these are the folks who actually watch children when people have to work. And the kids that they watch are basically from 0 to 3, 4, 5 years old. And what we saw was this incredible synergy because the family daycare providers are really like kids' first teachers, other than, of course, their parents. And what they wanted was, other than, because they're some of the most exploited people on earth, they make maybe $2 an hour these days. But what they wanted was more than just a fair wage, more than just getting some health care protection, more than just getting a day off every now and then. They also wanted to be represented by us so that we could help upgrade their profession.
So these are the people who take care of children in their homes.
In their homes, and there are about 28,000 of them. Mm-hmm. And so we're in the middle of our first negotiation. Basically, you have a negotiation with the state. And what people want is, obviously, they want to have a fair wage, but they also want to have the training programs that they need so that they really can be kids' first teachers. And the reason I said there's such a synergy is because what we have learned from brain research in particular is that kids, when they're 1, 2, 3 years old, they're sponges. Not only are they rambunctious, wonderful, beautiful things, they're sponges. And so if you actually help prepare kids at that age for educational opportunity, have a print-rich environment, have math manipulatives, really start working in terms of preparing kids for education, it is a huge boon to kids in terms of being able to be learning ready by the time they go to pre-K and kindergarten.
So the issues for the daycare providers obviously pay, but also additional training and some benefits.
Exactly right. And when you talk to people, I mean, these new folks we represent, they're community. I mean, they're in everybody's communities. It's like you remember, Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Rivera, who's watching, kids when people have to work.
Right.
But what they also have, which is so outrageous, is that they actually have more regulations imposed on them by government than anybody else. I mean, I'll give you an example. Egress issues. Making sure that the fire code, the building code, the other municipal, the Administration for Children's Services, the State Administration for Children's Services, they all have requirements now in terms of how one watches kids. So part of what we're doing is we're untangling some of these requirements for people. So we're trying to cut bureaucracy. We're trying to make the requirements actually plain English-like. We're trying to make sure that people have, some economic security, and we're trying to help them learn their craft better so that they can help kids more.
Now you also represent some visiting nurses, correct?
We represent, basically it's school people, it's home daycare providers or family daycare providers. We represent about 5,000 nurses, not just VNS, Visiting Nurse Service, but many nurses in several hospitals in the city of New York. And we represent people who work for United Cerebral Palsy. We represent people in private schools. We represent people in charter schools. So we actually, one of the reasons we call ourselves now a union of professionals is because what binds everyone is that there is a real want and desire and aspiration on part of our members, not only to be treated with respect and dignity, but to make sure that the services that they do are the best they can be, that the quality of what we provide is the best that we can be for the people we serve.
Okay. Now, people often talk about the power of the UFT.
Right.
And, I mean, you do a lot of lobbying. What kind of influence do you have on the people who make laws in New York State?
Well, I think probably you would ask, if you asked 100 people, you'd get 100 different answers. But ultimately, and this is a very, I guess this is a very personal answer after being the head of the union for 10 years. Not only in New York City, but almost anywhere in this nation, probably anywhere in this world, most of the time, individuals in and of themselves do not have power. I guess if you are as entrepreneurial and as rich as Michael Bloomberg is, you have personal power.
Right.
But most of us do not have personal power unless we band together. And so one of the reasons that you have a labor union is that it's a lot of people banding together to try to get something done on behalf of themselves, but also on behalf of the people that we serve. So politics is a way of trying to get something done. In the political arena, particularly if you respect and revere democracy and ensuring that government institutions actually work for the people. So, of course, we would get involved in politics or get involved in lobbying, but that's not the only way of creating power. The other ways of creating power, frankly, are equally important, which is making sure that, and the union didn't always have this ability to do this. I mean, some of us lived through it, and some of us remember, and some of us have tried to heal the scars of Ocean Hill-Brownsville. But we have to be, trade unions, teacher unions, have to be part and parcel of the community. We have to be people who community folks see as people who really care about the kids we serve. And so we've spent a lot of time, not only in the political arena these days, but also in ensuring that we work in the community. And the last piece of power that's important is that you have to actually not just care about your own members and their economic security, but you have to really care about the institution, like the public education. And so we've tried to actually throw out and take the risk of really trying to make public institution a more viable institution for every child we serve.
I know, following along those lines, I know that under the Giuliani administration, Mayor Giuliani was a big trasher of the teachers union, and there have been people before him. I mean, the rap was that the teachers care only about themselves. They don't care about the teachers. They don't care about the parents. They just care about. Do you think that you've been able to change that perception?
In almost everywhere I walk or go in the city these days, people come up to me and say, keep fighting for the kids. And I get that more and more and more. And I think that I wouldn't be getting that if the perception hadn't been changed. Now, what's sad about this is that every time, now I'm not saying that every single thing in our contract is a good thing, and I'm not saying that everything we do is selfless or altruistic, but at the end of the day, the most amazing thing about representing teachers is that it is true, the little ditty that says teachers want what children need. At the end of the day, virtually everybody went into teaching to make a difference in the lives of kids. They certainly didn't go into it to be rich. But I want to, and they want to make sure that there's a social compact that says, if you spend your life doing this, you will at least be a member of the middle class so that you can provide for your families. But I have seen a shift in terms of public attitude, back to where it used to be, where people see that teachers really want to be teaching to make a difference in the lives of kids and want to mold the next generation. I think a lot of what Mayor Giuliani did, and look, Chancellor Klein does this too sometimes, and a lot of other people do this sometimes, when they don't want to engage. For Mayor Giuliani, it was when they didn't want to spend the money, the resources on public education. They had to find somebody to demonize, and they ended up demonizing teachers. And that is, I think, publicly a tragic thing. You can say you don't like this provision of a contract, or you don't like that provision of a contract, and keep it that way, but to demonize the very people who actually spend their lives helping kids is a bad thing.
You know, you talked about the needs of, you know, having unions to unite individual people to get you know the things done that they, and I had they had the freelancers union on here before, you know, as part of the, you know, and as you know, in the recent decades, the amount of union representation of U.S. workers has decreased substantially. You know, in your reaching out, the UFT is reaching out to different constituency, whether the nurses, the daycare, the child care providers. Are you trying to bring the unions back to these individual people?
Look, that's part of, you know, whether it's John Sweeney and the AFL-CIO or Anna Berger and Change the Wind, we are still, the AFT is still part of the AFT, the AFL-CIO. The AFT is my national parent union, American Federation of Teachers. But at the end of the day, we know that there is a real correlation between the number of people in the United States of America who are represented by a union and in a union, and the potential of Americans, more and more of them, to reach their aspirations. Whether those aspirations are being in the middle class, or whether those aspirations are making sure their kids go to a good college, or making sure that in retirement they can buy the drugs they need and pay the rent. And so ultimately, the kind of issues that most people talk about, like what the gas prices are now, can we afford college, what's going to happen in terms of health care, those kind of issues are what the union movement was all about, making sure that if you play by the rules, you work really hard, you're going to have some economic security.
Right.
And so I do see our role.
And people are having less and less economic security.
Oh my God, it's just, look, it's unbelievable watching what is happening to working people in the United States of America. When somebody, if you're 58 years old, all of a sudden you lose your job, what are you going to do?
Right.
And what's going to happen in terms of your pension, and who is going to take care of you? So there's a lot of not just education issues, but economic issues that the labor movement used to deal with. And I think you're starting to see people say, we really need more collective action again. We really need a labor movement again. And so part of the organizing beyond what people would have thought was our traditional jurisdiction is about recreating a labor movement. But part of it is also because people really want a union. And so what we've tried to do is when we see that people want one, we try to figure out if we can actually represent people.
Right, right. It's interesting. My husband, who is a former journalist and now is, well, until recently was in management at a financial company, you know, and having dealing with the union's demands was always complaining about the unions. Of course, now he's out. He's just recently been laid off. And, you know, and I've always told him, I have always belonged to a union and I wouldn't have it any other way.
I mean, look, there's a macro issue and a micro issue. On the macro issue, on the macro side, and sorry to sound so like an economist here, but on the macro side, if working people don't have a way of lifting all boats, so that in the United States of America there is some level of economic security, both in terms of health care, retirement security, and if, God forbid, you lose your job, how you're going to make sure your family is protected during that period of time. Also, retraining, and when the economy changes, who's going to make sure that Americans are going to be able to have the jobs of the future? So we get that as Americans when it comes to education, K through 12, but we don't remember that much in terms of working people who are older than, you know, than 18.
Right.
But so on the macro level, people get that the unions actually fight to make sure all of that happened. On the micro level, it's always about, you know, a union can be sometimes obnoxious because the union leader is going to say to a manager, why did you do that? But good managers, if they can answer the question, why did they do that? And why it was fair to do that, they're going to have a better shop anyway. Because at the end of the day, in almost all the work that many of us do, it's very labor intensive. It very much requires you to give your all. And people are far less demoralized and far more focused on wanting to do their work if they feel good about it.
Yeah.
And if they have a voice and a stake in it.
We're going to take a break, but we'll be back with more with Randi Weingarten, President of the United Federation of Teachers, in just a moment.
These things we count on every day started as ideas. Ideas from the minds of African Americans. Support minority education today so we don't miss out on the next big idea tomorrow. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Randi Weingarten, President of the United Federation of Teachers. Randi, just this week, the Department of Education, the UFT, and Mayor Bloomberg announced the latest state test scores in math and reading for students in grades 3 through 8. And that these scores have improved dramatically this year over last year. In math, the percentage of students meeting or exceeding state standards rose more than 9% over last year, while in English, the percent of students meeting or exceeding state standards rose almost 7 percentage points. What does this mean, actually? I know the New York Times pointed out in its story that on the last round of national tests, the national assessment tests, the test showed no improvement over the previous years. And some people are saying, well, you know, it's because the state tests have gotten easier. So what do the test scores mean?
So the test scores, and I think that when people saw the NAEP scores, the national scores last year, it made the point that actually I have attempted to make for the last several years, which is you cannot look at one set of scores in a vacuum. The fact that people try to make these state tests the be-all and the end-all and try to make a lot of high-stakes decisions on them is part of what has been wrong with No Child Left Behind and some of the folks who are just focused on what the test scores are. You have to look at them over a long period of time. So yesterday was a really good news day. And we'll see if the federal tests, which is really the gold standard of all tests, actually affirm the results or not. But yesterday showed us that we are going in the right direction. You look at these test scores over the course of 3 years, and you see, are you going in the right direction? Are you making progress? Because they are important. They measure something.
Right.
And so when you see a jump like this, what you're seeing is that there's more focus in schools on proficiency levels in terms of math and English. And we are lifting up all boats, because what was really important about these scores was the narrowing of the achievement gap between Hispanic and African American youngsters and white and Asian youngsters. And that was the really good news story. And also was that we were lifting up the achievement levels of kids who have been limited English proficient. So it shows that one is going in the right direction. Is it the be-all and the end-all? No. Is it the only measure of student achievement we should be looking at? Absolutely not. And part of the debate these days is that when it becomes the only measure, that's when we stop educating the whole child, because other things like a child's social development, a child's character, art, music, physical education, particularly given the obesity levels in the city, given the asthma levels in the city, we need to make sure that kids get it all, and they should have an ability to get it all. And that's why some of us have said, yes, test scores have a role, an important role, but these math and English scores are not the only role, are not the only things we should be measuring. We need to also measure a rigorous curriculum. We need to measure critical thinking. We really need to make sure we are really helping kids be participants in the democracy, and probably more important for them, have the skills they need so that they can not only dream their dreams but achieve them.
Let's talk about school reform, which everybody's been talking about for the last 8 years. When the Bloomberg administration came in with its sweeping school reforms, its relationship with the UFT was very fractious at that particular point in time. And there have been all kinds of complaints, not just from the UFT, but from various aspects of the school system and the community, that about the Department of Education micromanaging things in the schools, that the so-called parent liaisons didn't know what they were doing, that the new administration had swept away some of the old structures of the school system and hadn't necessarily put anything in their place. You had principals who were quitting in droves, and there was no new teacher's contract for a long time. So where are we right now with school reform, and what's the union's relationship with Bloomberg and Klein right now?
Look, teachers are, and sorry if I sound like a cheerleader for teachers, but not only am I, but I think they deserve it. Teachers are some of the most resilient people I know, because they have watched a lot of things come and go. And what they try to do is they try to do their best under whatever circumstances they find themselves in. What the Bloomberg, one of the things I've always said about the Bloomberg administration is I've always been very respectful of the fact that the mayor wanted to take responsibility for schools. And I thought that that was a real amazing thing that he wanted to do. One of the things I've been critical of is that they decided that anybody who had more than a nanosecond more of experience than they did was part of the status quo group, as opposed to people who really wanted to actually educate children. And they looked for the demon as opposed to trying to figure out how to lift all boats. Now, what they have done, and that's part of the reason we're fighting so hard on the budget right now, is they've put in an unprecedented level of investment, both in terms of capital, as well as, even though everybody looks these days and says, isn't it great, we've raised teacher salaries 43%. There were 3 tough contract battles to get to that point.
Right.
But what's happened is that both of us have focused on teacher quality. Before they came in, 20% of our teachers were uncertified. Now, virtually no one is uncertified. Mm-hmm. And you have basically 5 people who are vying for every job in terms of teaching right now.
Really?
So there is a huge difference in terms of teacher quality and in terms of recruitment. We still have a lot more to go, though, in terms of how we make sure that people in schools really work together in a respectful way and use the resources that they have in the best way possible. Like, in our view, you lower class sizes as much as you can so that you can have real personal attention for kids. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot of bickering and a lot of fights between the chancellor, the mayor, and ourselves, because I don't think that parents and teachers are as respected as they ought to be. And I don't think we're building the capacity of all schools the way in which we ought to. But in terms of, and you're going to see in the days and weeks ahead, we ask the school system to do an accountability of themselves,
right, which
they didn't do, and we have done it for them.
Right.
And so you're going to see that same, what I'm saying about what teachers feel about the chancellor and the mayor will be reflective in some of that.
We just have a few more minutes, but I have this observation. I have a good friend who is in the Teaching Fellows program right now, and I have a late friend who taught in the schools for a long time. And what they told me, if my hair weren't already curly, it would have curled my hair. And basically it is that what they describe, they're dealing with students who come to school apparently with no respect for the education process. Their only goal seems to be to try to subvert it, to avoid learning anything, to make sure that the teacher can't teach them anything or anybody else anything. Just total disrespect for the teachers, lying on the teachers, cursing the teachers out. What can you do in situations like that?
We have one of the hardest things for new teachers is the whole issue of classroom management, because you're managing 20 to 30, if you're a high school teacher, 170 youngsters. And it's a hard skill to learn, but also it's something that the school system should do in terms of helping to support folks. But this is why, in terms of us, the mantra is always, you need to have qualified principals and teachers, you need to have a safe and secure environment, and you need to have resources that are differentiated, but where you can really help get to every single child and help every single child. And what your friends are talking about is that we live in a school system with 1 million kids, and some of them come in from and are really, really challenged. And we have to help all of them. And so that's part of the reason why many of us say, let's have a code of conduct in school where we're actually teaching kids about how to respect themselves and how to respect others, because if we do that, they're going to succeed in life.
Yeah.
But we have to help every single child. It's why the New York City teaching job is one of the toughest jobs, but it's also one of the most rewarding.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's the teachers who get the blame for a lot of the problems and attitude issues that the children come in with.
But that's part of the reason why I don't care what the school system says they need to do in some ways in terms of showing where scores are or things like that. But the school system's job is not to blame downward.
Right.
The school system's job is to create the capacity and take that responsibility. So what you'll hear sometimes we'll say is, like for us, the progress reports were never mind. We think that they could be more accurate. We think that they could be fairer. But what we really blame the Board of Education about is that they have to take the responsibility to help us, help teachers, help principals do a better job. We all want to make sure every single child in our charge succeeds. Why would you be a school teacher other than that?
Right.
But somebody has to help us. So if a kid is really acting out, what happens to the other kids in your class?
Right.
So
I've got to stop you.
Anyway, sorry.
Obviously, the schools, it's complex. We could talk about them forever.
Exactly.
But I want to thank you, Randi Weingarten, President of the United Federation of Teachers, for joining me. And for the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.